Well, like I said, welcome everybody. It's really neat to have you here. We're definitely in a different setting than usual. Welcome to my house. This is our guest bedroom. I have my mat and cushion here, and my wife and I have a nice little altar. As I was just thinking, it's so beautiful outside, and wouldn't it be cool someday when the time is right and we can start hanging out together in person again? You guys could come over here and maybe we could do one of these talks with you in my backyard, and we can share in the Dharma, and my wife can grill. She's the master griller of our house. For the past couple Tuesdays, I know, going back a little ways, we've been working our way through the been working our way through our chant book on Tuesdays. And I was here with you about a month ago talking about Shi Tao's Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage, which Wayne talked about another Shi Tao poem last week, being Harmony of Difference and Sameness. And tonight I'm here with you talking about another poem that we chant, and that's the Trust and Heart Mind. And Trust and Heart Mind is based on a poem by our third Chinese ancestor, Jinzher Suksan. So if you've been here on Saturdays, you know we do a chant of our ancestors, starting with the Bodhidharma and going all the way to Dainin Katagiri Roshi, our temple's founder. And just to give you a sense of where Suksan is in our lineage of ancestors, he's second, right below Bodhidharma. He is Bodhidharma's grand Dharma son. So Weiku, Zaizu Weiku would have been Suksam's teacher. The Trust and Heart Mind is quite a beautiful poem, and I wish we could chant it together. And certainly I was just thinking it would be neat once we post this talk on YouTube to include a link to a translation so folks who are participating right now could have a chance to see it. I'm pretty much just going to talk today for about a half an hour. I plan to talk about the title, Trust and Heart Mind, unpack that a little bit, talk about the first verse, a verse in the middle of the piece, and then talk a little bit about how I found it helpful for me personally in my Zazen practice, and then also just in my daily life. And I hope we can talk for about 30 minutes. I'll talk for about 30 minutes and then turn it over to the group, and hopefully we can talk too. I really find hearing from you is always my favorite part of these talks. So I hope by the end of it, we can have a really cool discussion together. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the title, Trust and Heart Mind. The Chinese title is the Zhenjin Ming, and certainly there's a lot of different ways we can translate that. That word trust, we can also use faith and heart mind, and we can also use rely. And I really like that word rely because it's simple, it's direct, and it's practical. So we can think of the name of this poem being Rely on Heart Mind. And heart and mind in our practice, as some of you know, is indistinguishable. We don't see a difference between our mind and our hearts. My Dharma name is actually Doshin, meaning way of the heart mind. Do is way, and Shin is heart mind. Yet, I think it's neat to think about that heart mind even simpler in relation to this piece, and just think of the title as Relying on Our Hearts, because that really is the central theme, that we don't need anything extra, we don't need anything external to do this practice. Everything that we need to continue on our path, to relieve suffering of the world, to bring compassion and wisdom to this moment is right here. It's right here within us. And that is very much in keeping with the Buddha's central teaching of the Four Noble Truths as well. So this Relying on Our Hearts, or the Trust and Mind poem, has a lot of deep lessons that tie really back to some very foundational Buddhist teachings that really make it a powerful beautiful piece that, again, one I found a lot of support in to return to time and time again. And when I think of that relying on our heart, or I should say relying on my heart, and what that means to me, I think of Category Roshi. Category Roshi often said, nothing extra, nothing extra. Um, and that meant uh, we don't need to add on layers to this moment here to experience it fully and completely. And we ourselves don't need to add on layers to ourselves to do this practice in this moment fully and completely. We don't need to be something more. We don't need to be something different. We don't need to be something better. And we don't need to take anything away to open up and touch this greater stillness and this greater peace and this greater quiet that's right here. And certainly I have trouble with that sometimes. I do. I think, man, if I didn't have this crazy job that kept me away from doing Zazen, I could really do this practice. Or man, if I didn't have this hurried, busy life in the 21st century, I could just hang out at the Zen Center and really do this practice. Or man, if I could be more still, if I could be more quiet, if this mind of mine didn't have to be this monkey mind always churning and churning and churning, I could still do this practice. But in the reality, in the midst of all that, in the midst of that great activity, that's our opportunity to do this practice. That's what brings this practice to our lives. And certainly that includes when we face difficult and uncertain times. And even in the difficulty and even in this uncertainty, we still have an opportunity to touch stillness, and we still have an opportunity to turn the lamp within, and we still have the opportunity to rely on this heart here. And Suksan himself is a really good example. Suksan lived in a very difficult time, the 7th century in China. Buddhists were persecuted, temples were destroyed, written records were erased, monuments to the Buddha were toppled, Buddhist clergy were defrocked, and Suksan himself lived as a layperson during the day and practiced Buddhism at night in secret. Yet what's interesting when we read the Trust and Heart Mind piece, it sure doesn't seem to be written by an individual facing the difficulty of someone living as an internally displaced person. And with that, I want to just turn to the first, for example. So the first verse reads, "The great way isn't difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences. Let go of longing and aversion, and everything will be perfectly clear. When you cling to a hair's breadth of difference, heaven and earth are set apart. If you want to realize the truth, don't be for or against." So I'll read that again. The great way isn't difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences. Let go of longing and aversion, and everything will be perfectly clear. When you cling to a hair's breadth of distinction, heaven and earth are set apart. If you want to realize the truth, don't be for or against. So do you all think that's how Suksan really lived? Did he really live unattached to preferences? Even in the midst of his own hardship and difficulty, was he able to let go of longing and aversions? Was he able to let go of his likes and his dislikes? I know when I read that, my initial response is, yeah, right. I know I have all sorts of preferences. I have all sorts of longings and aversions. I have a whole set of likes and dislikes. I'm sitting here looking at LaCroix, sparkling orange, naturally infused. This is my favorite flavor. And then I have this other flavor, cucumber mint sparkling water, that I don't like so much. So is that not Zen? Is that not Zen? to like LaCroix, sparkling essence, orange, more than cucumber mint. Is that not Zen? And I don't necessarily think that Suxan's calling us to let go of our preferences or calling us to let go of our likes and dislikes. But rather, I think what he's calling us to do is to maintain our practice in the midst of them, to do our work to stay connected to stillness, quiet, and spaciousness in the midst of the great activity of life, not rejecting, but embracing fully and completely. Our Zen practice isn't about rejecting our humanness. It's about living our humanness fully for everything that means. Living our humanness fully and completely for everything that means. As Suxan says later in the piece, in a world of things as they are, there is no self, no non-self. If you want to describe its essence, the best you can say is not two. In this not two, nothing is separate and nothing in this world is excluded. And as I said, that's our aversions and our longings and our likes and our dislikes. They are part of this not two-ness. They are part of the Bodhidharma expressing itself in the world. They are the manifestation of the one bright pearl that our co-guiding teacher, Tim Burkett, talks about. That one bright pearl resting in a wide open warm sea. And they are part of that grand thusness that underlines and infuses every moment that we experience in our lives. And it's sometimes in our practice, it's getting attached to this idea that somehow our longing and aversions don't belong, that can get us stuck. Getting attached to ideas that we shouldn't like or we shouldn't dislike, that gets us stuck in a sterility of a practice that isn't connected to this grander humanness of being alive. Take, for example, when we sit, we might meet something like frustration because our knee is pain, right? We might sit and we might face frustration of a knee pain, and we might think, oh, this frustration I'm experiencing, this frustration shouldn't show up. This frustration shouldn't be here. I should just open myself up to this knee pain right here and right now. I want to leave this frustration out. Or how about waiting for the bell to ring? We might sit thinking, oh, why doesn't the Doan just ring that bell already? Why doesn't the Doan just ring that bell already? Oh, and then we might think, oh, I'm not supposed to think that. That's not Zen. It's not Zen for me to want that bell to ring. But both of those are included. They're both included in our practice. And the real healing opportunity that we have, the healing power of our practice, isn't somehow rejecting knee pain or wanting to push away the feeling of that longing for the bell to ring, but rather being able to stay connected to stillness and stay connected to that wide spaciousness within that experience, So I want to just take a moment and talk about the life of the Buddha a little bit, and talk about the life of the Buddha before he was the Buddha himself, or at least before he received that title, and go back to the time when he was Prince Siddhartha Gautama. Now, for those of us who know the story of the Buddha, he grew up, he was raised, said to be shielded from any difficulty, pain, or suffering from his family. His father wanted him to grow up to be a great warrior chief, while there was this oracle who said that your son was going to be a great spiritual teacher. And in order to prevent that, he decided that his son would experience no longing and would be always absent of any desire, because all of his needs would be forever met. Yet amidst this experience of growing up, wanting to experiencing no longing, no aversions, having all likes met, never experiencing, not disliking, the Buddha still missed something, right? He still longed for something. There's a German word that doesn't have a direct English translation that roughly means longing for a place we've never been, or far sickness. This is what the Buddha was experiencing. Even in midst this world where everything that he ever wanted was met, he still felt a sense of longing, a sense of wanting something different. And I think that we all know, those of us who practice and hang out at Zen centers, we know this experience. We know this experience for far sickness because often it's what brings us to a Zen center in the first place. So eventually the Buddha himself, as it's said in the stories, decided to escape. He decided to escape his palace and go to the local villages, and just see what might be there. And there, visiting the real everyday world for the first time, he saw an old man. For the first time, he saw an individual sick, and for the first time, he saw someone dying. So right there in front of him, for the first time, he experienced old age, sickness, and death. And then what else did he see, right? He saw that standing there, he saw an ascetic practicing, an ascetic with a begging bowl in meditation. For the first time, not only did the Buddha witness firsthand old age and sickness and death, he witnessed someone trying to confront it, trying to confront it, trying to do something about it, and trying to heal from it. And lucky for us, rather than going right back into his palace where he would never have to see sickness, old age, and death again, the Buddha did what Suksan's calling us to do in the Trust and Heart Mind poem. He went towards it. He went towards it to understand it. He went towards it to be able to see it clearly. And he went towards it to hopefully find freedom from it in the midst of it. Hopefully find freedom from it in the midst of it. There's a book I really like that I returned to a couple times in my life. Some of you might know it's written by Rabbi Harold Kushner. It's called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And the book was written after Rabbi Kushner's son was passed away as a teenager from a really rare genetic disorder, progeria. And it's interesting to note, while the book attempts to explore this question of what do we do when bad things happen from good people from a monotheistic perspective, I think you could say our own practice, our own Buddhist practice, is really an attempt to address the same question from a non-theistic perspective. And I can tell you probably the most difficult thing I ever experienced happened 2 summers ago. On July 22nd, my first daughter was born. My wife and my first daughter was born after she was born 14 weeks premature on July 22nd. And it was just an absolutely harrowing day. It was a Sunday. My wife and I were moving. We were unpacking boxes, and my wife reported that she just wasn't feeling good. And then she started becoming anxious and nervous and just didn't feel right. Just didn't feel right. So she called the nurse's line. The nurses said, it's probably nothing. Go ahead and wait a couple hours. And if you're still not feeling well, call us back. Well, my wife continued to wait, and she continued to feel nervous, and she continued to feel anxious. And she said, I need to go to the hospital. Something's wrong. I need to go to the hospital. So we did. We went. And I had this very vivid experience that I'll never forget. We were driving, if you know the area, the West Bank of the U of M, we were driving east on Riverside Avenue towards the Masonic Children's Hospital. And I glanced at the clock, and it said 12:30 p.m. And I remember thinking, okay, it's 12:30 p.m. We'll be home by late afternoon to continue unpacking our boxes. Well, things went really differently. And by late afternoon, our daughter Lucy was born. And then 114 days later, we finally left the hospital. So you can imagine that 114 days is filled with a whole heck of a lot of ups and downs, a lot of ups and downs. You know, you have the joy of your child being born. It's great experiences, like for the first time, being able to hold our daughter Lucy on her chest and feeling that small hand scratch your chest. There's the great joys of hitting benchmarks related to their weight and related to their feeding. But there's also a lot of difficulty too. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens. You know, our daughter had to have surgery. She had to have heart surgery when she was 5 weeks old. There were times when monitors would go off because oxygen or the heart rate was low. There were the times that you finally thought you were going to be able to leave the hospital and bring Lucy home, only to find out that we'd have to stay there for yet another week, and then yet another week, and then yet another week. And interestingly enough, during this time, I was also studying Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka. Nagarjuna is a really influential Buddhist teacher, lived about 700 years after the time of the Buddha. Some even call him the second Buddha. And his central teaching is essentially the same not-to-ness that Suksan talks about in the Trust and Heart-Mind Peace. Nagarjuna teaches us that this moment here, for all it is no different from this grand interconnected experience of the oneness totality of all things. So my like of orange essence LaCroix more than my dislike of cucumber mint, that is exactly the same thing as this great interconnected experience that leaves nothing out. And that was hard to comprehend. It was really hard to comprehend that when I was in the hospital with Lucy. We had wonderful healthcare providers in the hospital, and it was so funny because they were all so young. You know, it's a teaching hospital, so everybody's like in their early to mid 20s. And my wife's one of the residents that was at my wife's side a few days after Lucy was born said to her a couple times, "You get to feel all the feelings. You get to feel all the feelings." And that was so healing to me, that all these feelings, this whole breadth of feelings that you feel when you're in the hospital, where it can be everything from sad, mad, glad to surprised, is entirely okay. That we have the permission to feel those feelings. And when we open ourselves up to that same not-to-ness, we open up ourselves to the same permission to allow our longings and aversions to exist, all the while we experience the greater stillness and the wider spaciousness of this practice. We get to loosen up. We get to loosen up. And there that we can start experiencing the freedom of this practice, not by pushing away those longings and aversions, not by wanting to turn off a switch that makes us no longer like or dislike, not by seeing some wide chasm between the earth that I am now and the heaven I want to be, but sitting within all that and striving for a practice that seeks clarity to be able to see it for what it is. But still, there's this question that remains, is what do we do about the tough stuff? What do we do about the tough stuff? Well, we keep up our practice. We continue to sit. We return to the cushion. And over time, we do start to see some space. We do start to see some space. And we can begin to trust that space. And we can begin to rely on that space. But it's tough. It's tough. And we need support. And one of the contradictions of this piece is that, yes, we can rely on our own hearts, and that's really important. But we also need to reach out. And we also need to strive. We also need to reach out for support when it's needed. And we have support in the form of our teachers. We have support in the form of our community. We have support in form of the teaching itself. The three jewels are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So with our time left, I want to actually now transition to talk about some additional mindfulness techniques that I put to use that I find helpful when facing times of difficulty. And these are things that actually I found going through this experience of 114 days while Lucy was in the hospital. Some of the things that I did in order to just keep this practice up. And the four things I found that were helpful were sharing joy with others, focusing on the precepts, whittling emotions down, and then practicing a gentle and non-judgmental attitude. So those four are sharing joy with others, focusing on the precepts, whittling our emotions down, and practicing a gentle and non-judgmental attitude. And I'll just probably spend 3 to 5 minutes talking about each one of these, and then we can bring things to a close. So first off, sharing joy with others. I think, I think when I'm feeling times of difficulty or I'm feeling down, just my personality and my temperament sometimes is to want to shut down a little bit. And I might think, oh, I don't want to connect with anyone else. I don't want to see anyone else. And I just want to turn myself inward. And it can be really, really hard to reach out and just connect with other people. But one way that can be a little easier, though, is to connect with people over silly stuff. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to really make silly joy part of our practice. If the Bodhidharma, the Dharma is expressing itself in every aspect of our daily lives and every experience we have as a Dharma gate, that includes doing puzzles with our family. It includes meeting up with our friends over Skype. It includes binge watching Netflix TV shows with our spouse. And even amidst all of that kind of activity, we can still find opportunities to do this practice. We can find opportunities to follow our breath. We can find opportunities to check in what's going on within ourselves emotionally. We can find opportunities just to touch a little bit of stillness or a little bit of quiet just by watching our thoughts come and go. I saw Nancy Pelosi talking on TV, and she was talking about the importance of getting out and recreating right now. And she made this comment that recreating and recreating come from the same word. And I really liked that. I thought that was so cool. It's so true. Just doing silly, joy-filled things is recreating a world. It recreates a world anew. And it does offer us this opportunity to rest in compassion and rest in wisdom while we offer that same compassion and wisdom to others. So that was our first one, sharing joy with others. Another one that I think can be helpful is focusing on the precepts and working on the precepts. Regardless of what we might be experiencing or facing, we do have an opportunity to live our precepts. Another book, a book I read recently, I talked about a month ago when we talked about Shu Tao's Song of the Grassroots Hermitage. The book's called Road to Heaven, Encounters with Chinese Hermits, and it's by Red Pine. It's a wonderful travelogue as Red Pine seeks out Chinese Taoist and Zen monks practicing in hermitages among the mountains of China, and they're living today. That's so cool. They're living today. And many of these individuals have faced the same types of hardships that Suksan faced in his life in the 7th century, in the sense that they've seen persecution. They've had their own monasteries and temples destroyed. They lived through the Cultural Revolution in China. Their numbers have dwindled from the thousands to maybe 50 to 150. And many of them, time and time again in this book, regardless of the form of practice, return to the depth and the value of the precepts. And one even mentions, specifically brings up a rural villager um, who's a subsistence farmer. And he mentions that this individual doesn't have enough time to practice, that doesn't have enough time to meditate. There's this life doesn't allow them that space. Being a rural, poor farmer in the mountains of China. And he mentions that this individual still maintains a strong precept practice. So regardless of what we might be facing, we do have those opportunities to work and give, and we have those opportunities to open ourselves up to offering life, and we do have those opportunities to reflect on things of like, what does it mean to speak truthfully? So the third one I want to talk about is whittling emotions down. I talked earlier about um, being mad, sad, glad, or surprised. Um, those are the four emotions that clowns are trained to express: only sad, mad, glad, or surprised. And essentially, all of our emotional experience, all those variety of feelings that we do feel, we can actually boil down to just those four. Like take sad, for example. Sad might show up in a whole variety of different forms in our daily day-to-day life, right? And we might, when we sit, we might feel overwhelmed by all those different ways that sadness comes up and piles on top of one another in our practice. But one way that we might be able to find stillness amidst that sadness is just to see those emotions come up for us and just say, oh, I see you there, sadness. I see you there, sadness. Regardless of what the emotion is, just boil it down to its essence and just simply stay with it and say, I see you there, sadness. And just being with that emotion at its bare essence allows us to have some space and loosening around it. And in that can make it a little bit more manageable. So the last one then I want to talk about is just a non-judgmental and gentle attitude. And I think this one practice can help infuse all the other three that we talked about. Is just staying with the experience and just offering it gentleness and offering it no judgment. Because in a weird way, as we're experiencing difficulty and if we're experiencing adverse emotions, it's our bodies. It's our bodies and our minds and our thoughts and our heart trying to take care of us, trying to take care of us and just being a little confused on the best way to do it. So what if we just rather stay with it? Just stay with it and just offer it gentleness and just offer it no judgment and just see what happens. And just see what happens. So those are a couple of practices I found helpful, and I just wanting to be mindful of the time. It's just a little after 8. So hopefully I addressed some of the central themes of the Trust and Heart Mind chant. We explored the title. We explored the first stanza. And then we took a look at some of those practices that I found helpful while I went through a difficult experience with our daughter in the hospital. And I think we can, with that, why don't we bring it to a close and we can turn it over to you. And I would love to hear if you all have any thoughts or comments.